Hey guys, Mark from Soul Adventure. Welcome back to the bow build of my 2014 Elite Energy 35. Today I want to talk about a very important step, one that can be either really simple or incredibly complicated, and that is paper tuning. Lots and lots of variables that go into paper tuning, and that's what I want to talk about today. First of all, let's talk about you at home doing paper tuning by yourself. There's lots of complicated jigs and stands and rolls and all kinds of PVC or wood or things you can build to make a paper tuning jig. My favorite is the good old cardboard box. Cut a hole in the front of the box, slightly smaller than a piece of paper, and then just affix your standard computer paper to that with tacks or something of the sort. I also cut a hole in the back of the box so that my arrow can pass through and that the cardboard won't damage the vanes or feathers or whatever you're shooting. So really simple, really easy to hang onto a box, replace the paper as you're shooting, and you can be up and paper tuning at home in just a few minutes. A few considerations to keep in mind: make sure that you elevate. You want to be shooting into the paper parallel with the ground. So you're going to want the paper, as you're holding the bow, you're going to want it shoulder high, so you're shooting straight through that paper. And then there's lots of different recommendations on the distance that you want to shoot from. You'll get guys shooting as close as 2-3 feet all the way out to 7 yards. I kind of do all of the above. A lot of times I'll start around 5 yards. I'll do some paper tuning at say close to 2, further out to 7. Sometimes out well past that, but a lot of times I start about 5 to 7 and work my way in and out as I'm doing my paper tuning. So obviously the purpose of paper tuning is to shoot our arrows through paper and to see how those arrows are flying out of our bow. Are they coming in tail high, point high? Is the tail to the left? Is the tail to the right? Now the most common advice for paper tuning and a place to start, say you have a right tear, would be to move your rest in and out. Now here's where things get tricky. Your rest may not be the problem. So many guys have it stuck in their head that paper tuning is tuning the bow itself and how the bow is set up, but a critical factor in paper tuning is your arrow setup. What we're really looking at is how does the spine of your arrow act as it's leaving your bow. So my recommendation is always set your arrow rest to be the center shot that the bow manufacturer recommends. We already have a video covering that. Same thing with your knock height, where you're putting your D-loop or your knocking points. Set those either even, that's the best place to start, or maybe just a tad high if you happen to know that your bow prefers that. Again, we've covered this in previous videos. So start with center shot, start with knocking point, get a good distance away, begin to shoot through paper. Now, what do you do? How do you read the paper? And how do you respond? How do you know if you need to change something about your bow setup? Maybe you need to change something about your arrows. Where do you go from here? Well, that's what I want to talk about, but it's best to be covered in written form. So if you're not already watching this on the paper tuning article on souladventure.com, be sure to head over and do that. I'm going to link you to a bunch of great resources and discuss this in further. But for example, just to illustrate the point that it's not always the bow's fault when you're not paper tuning like you want to, it might be the arrow. I just started shooting these Easton injections. They are a 330 spine. My bow is at 30.5 inch draw, 70-pound limbs, and I typically shoot it maxed out, so it's usually around 72 pounds. I know from experience that this setup is going to want a 300 spine arrow. I was worried about that 330 being a little bit weak, and paper tuning told me that it was. And here's what I mean. I was getting indications of a weak arrow spine. Again, we'll fully discuss this in the article and what that paper looks like. And no matter what I did with my rest, moving it in or out, up or down, I was still getting indications and still getting tears that I didn't want to see. It wasn't until I turned the poundage of my bow down to around 66 pounds that this 330 spine started shooting the way that I wanted it to. So that's a perfect example. It wasn't the rest, it wasn't necessarily the knocking point. I wanted to keep those within manufacturer specs and where they should be, and tune my arrow by tuning my poundage. Now, there would be other options theoretically. If you're having a weak reaction, you could cut an arrow shorter, which actually stiffens that arrow. Wasn't an option for me. Or say you're having a stiff reaction, your arrow seems stiff. You could add point weight to the front or the rear, double up on inserts. So there's all kinds of ways that you can break down or build up an arrow spine, either by changing adjustments to your poundage or by the arrow build itself. Again, I have an article just published a few weeks ago talking in depth about arrow spine, so go check that out. So I hope that this video helps you get an overview, a higher level understanding of paper tuning. Be sure to check out the article, check out the resources. Easton, they have an exceptional tuning guide. I'm going to point you guys to that. And really, once you sit down and look at it, paper tuning doesn't have to be difficult. And if you take the time to paper tune, you're going to decrease the time you spend shooting out in the field and messing with your sight, and you're for sure going to get better broadhead flight. We'll cover all that soon. Thanks for staying tuned. SoulAdventure.com.